When I was in high school, the church camp was always held at Eureka College. I was going to a Christian church or Disciples of Christ church, and Eureka College was identified as a Disciples of Christ college. So, and during those summer meetings, I had declared that I was interested in pursuing the ministry. So as a result, my church was willing to help pay my tuition. The college gave me a scholarship, and they also gave me a part-time job, which was interesting. They assigned me to work with a friend of mine, tuck pointing, which is putting concrete in between the bricks to resell it. We made a career out of it almost. Anyway, I never applied anywhere else, so that was the only real choice that I had in mind. And it turned out to be a pretty good choice. Yes.
Okay.
I really did. And actually that was a blessing as well as a curse. I think like a lot of teenagers, I had this sense that you needed to be perfect. So I didn't drink, I didn't smoke, I didn't have access to an automobile, and so I didn't even have a driver's license until I went to later on in college. But that drive for perfection set me up for taking a real fall, and I joined a fraternity in college, and of course fraternities are noted for their parties, and I took a drink at one of them and ended up taking a lot of drinks, and that just toppled my perfectionism, and I went clear to the other extreme. College was one of the worst times for me spiritually as I've ever experienced, to the point where I felt like I was being influenced by negative entities. I don't know, it's a good question. I don't know why I did, but we all just decided to do it, and we ended up with the largest pledge class. I ended up being head of my pledge class, ended up being president of the fraternity my junior year, and I could have been president for 2 years if I'd have chose to do so. But I don't really know why we did, and that's a good question. Well, towards the end of my freshman year, my mother asked me how I felt about her getting a divorce. And that was a big issue for her. Back then, women in the church didn't get divorced. You were long-suffering, and she'd been long-suffering. But I encouraged her, I guess, as somebody supposedly going into the ministry. Maybe that's why she asked, I don't know. But anyway, I encouraged her to go ahead and get a divorce because it hadn't been a real marriage for years. And which she did. But at the time then, I thought I was going to have to come home and help support the family. And I don't know why I felt that way, because Mom had always made it on her own anyway. But as a result, I told the college that I was not returning, and I was going to go to the local college in my hometown, Decatur, because I could live at home and go to school and get a job. And I'd even applied to the local college and was accepted. And but for some reason, the leadership of the college at Eureka wanted to keep me. So they created a job at a salary where I worked part-time for the church and actually I guess I worked for the church, but I think the college may have been funding it. I'm not quite sure how they did it. Anyway, they gave me a weekly salary in exchange for my supposedly working with other students to get them involved in the church. And I think that may have contributed to my downfall. Because it really was probably the worst period of my life in an internal personal level. Because it was expecting more of me than I really had the ability to do. That's not an excuse, it's just trying to understand why I went so far off the deep end for the rest of my college years, and I never got out of that dynamic until I left, even though, you know, I had a lot of leadership positions. I was president of the fraternity council. I was the only student on a student faculty committee. So I was involved in a lot of things as a result of that little job. But it probably was more than I really had the maturity to handle. In high school, I guess there just wasn't a level of temptation, first of all. Secondly, I had a strong support group with the church. I worked a lot. Either I had morning newspaper routes, which would take a couple hours. I had double route. Or I was working for a member of the church who had a trucking company, and I was working from 9 to midnight and maybe later at the trucking company. So I didn't have a lot of extra time. But in college, I guess it was just a temptation, and once I went off the perfection track, it was like I went just the other way. It's a good question again. It obviously had some impact because I thought I had to go home, which in retrospect, I really didn't have to do that. So it must have had some pull there that I didn't really realize. Oh, yeah. I'm not sure where he was during that period. It may have been when he was in Guam. He was in Guam for a couple years. But I think he'd returned by then, and I think that's why Mom decided to get a divorce, is he'd come back and he wasn't any different than when he left. I certainly would warn him about the dangers of perfectionism and the fact that that's not the path. And I wish some adult had pulled me aside and just said, "Malcolm, straighten up." I don't think it would have taken much outside of me to get back onto some path, responsible path. But no one ever did, which is interesting. Part of it is, and I don't don't know, again, the same perfection versus the demonic pull. I mean, I really felt like I was under negative influence, and I wonder how many other teenagers and young people have that same sense of needing to be perfect. If that's something that's kind of ingrained in us, or is that something the church causes? But whatever it is, we're setting ourselves up for failure, because that's not what we're called to do. We're called to be as mature as we can be at each moment in our life, and that is perfection, not some outside standard of. And you see this happen all the time with the so-called fundamentalist leaders. They're out front preaching something, and then a year or two later you see where they're committing the very thing that they're trying to be an example for. So it's a common problem. But I also learned that there really is a demonic force, and it has impact on you. And I really did, I mean, I felt really badly about myself, but I couldn't stop. And it wasn't until I graduated from college and was on my way to seminary that I felt free. It was amazing. Anyway, I was happy to graduate.